Minister for Environment, Community and Local Government the need to adjust commercial rates and consider a large retail levy to support small retailers in town centres. Deputy, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and good afternoon to you, Minister. And I'd like to thank the Ceann Comhairle for giving me the opportunity to raise this issue here today. Cathaoirleach and Minister, Finglas Village is on its knees. It has two large retail centres on its outskirts, one to the north and one just to the south of it. There is a huge problem of vacant units in the Finglas Village centre, and it is genuinely struggling to compete with the two large out-of-town retailers or centres that I've just mentioned. Along with my Labour Party colleague, Councillor John Redmond, we have both been fighting to protect the village through keeping the post office open and opposing inappropriate developments such as arcades and things like that and slot machine places. We have also been looking at ways to revitalise the village, and I know the likes of Finglas Tidy Towns and Friends of the Finglas Village are genuinely doing Trojan work all in their own time to support ways to keep the village a vibrant place. But of course, the issue of Finglas Village is just one of many villages and towns, and it's replicated throughout the whole country, where towns are genuinely finding a number of vacant units, and they are facing with the challenges of out-of-town centres, which are really grabbing much more attention. In the short time that I do have, I want to speak about the idea of adjusting our commercial rates to support our retail centres in towns and villages. I recognise this problem crosses valuation issues and planning issues, but the main points I want to raise are as follows. I genuinely believe that rates should be aligned to incentivise development in core areas, and this would be in keeping with our planning guidelines. I also believe that a temporary large retail levy on massive out-of-town developments is genuinely worth considering, and I believe that both of these measures could strengthen local government and increase accountability. At present, with the exception of some, rates are applied evenly, irrespective of the location of the business. While councils have made huge efforts in recent years to reduce rates, this approach is indiscriminate of factors affecting retailers, such as accessibility or the amount of parking available. Also, businesses in turn create their own effects, such as large out-of-town retailers drawing customers from the town centres. In good times, this really wasn't an issue, I must say, but many of the existing out-of-town developments were built in a time when we had a fast-growing economy and the pie was actually getting bigger. But in a far more competitive economy, such as the one that we're in now, the advantages of the larger out-of-town retailers and the advantages that they have multiplied even greater. These competitive advantages are directly impacting on towns such as Finglas, as I mentioned, such as places like Naas, such as Ballinrobe, and they're just three of many that I've heard of throughout our country. And the reality of this is, the knock-on effect is, it's threatening jobs and undermining our planning policies. I believe councils should set their own rates according to location, giving reduced rates to those in core areas and setting increased rates for outer areas. It would be up to each council, of course, to do it based on local circumstances, but I believe it is workable, and I do believe it's cost neutral. I also think consideration could be given to very large shopping centres in out-of-town locations, as in a levy being put on those. For example, in Northern Ireland, a 3-year large retail levy was introduced on big out-of-town retailers. This levy could be used in conjunction with a revised rate scheme or just a standalone levy, but both of them are worth consideration. Minister, this principle that I've just outlined has already been established within the new development contribution guidelines, which require local authorities to apply lower contribution charges for developments in town centres and higher ones for out-of-town centres. Furthermore, the Putting People First reform document of local government will allow councils to adjust local property tax in areas. So with a differential rate scheme, which is what I'm proposing here today, councils and councillors would be able to set commercial rates in their own area and to align them to a policy that would be in alignment with planning policy, thereby enhancing local government reform. So essentially, Minister, just in a nutshell, because I'm sure I've just got a little bit of time left, that at the moment we have planning guidelines which say that towns and villages are at the core of our retail objectives. But yet, when we look at our rate scheme doesn't represent this at all. We provide the same rate scheme to large out-of-town retailers as to those who are within our planning guidelines in towns and villages. So if we really want to promote and enshrine our planning guidelines, which say that our towns, just Finglas Village or Naas and so on, are our key retail centres, we must have our rates scheme reflect that. And at the moment it doesn't. But I do welcome that our development contribution guidelines have changed to match our planning guidelines. So the only piece that's missing in the cake in order to change our regulations in order to be in accordance with our planning guidelines is our differential rates. And if we truly want to bring life and blood and activity into our towns and villages throughout the country, which are genuinely struggling, we need to change our rate scheme to reflect that. The reality is those who are out of town are in a position to pay larger rates. They have huge car parking spaces that people can avail of, and people go there for lots of reasons. But the reality is if we genuinely care about our towns and villages, we must have some sort of a differential rate scheme which reflects that. And one single point at the very end is, the reality is, you know, these large out-of-town retailers, which of course supply jobs, the ones in our towns and villages do the same, but the big difference is the majority of the retailers within our towns and villages are usually businesses that are owned by local people, providing local jobs and buying local produce which is sold on further. So I hope you'll take on board my suggestions here, Minister, and I am also conscious it isn't your direct department, but I do look forward to your response. Okay. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.
Minister.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I wish to thank the Deputy for raising this important matter for debate, and as you know, I am taking the matter on behalf of Minister Hogan. Local authorities are under a statutory obligation to levy rates on any property used for commercial purposes in accordance with the details entered in the valuation lists prepared by the Independent Commissioner of Valuation under the Valuation Act 2001. I think we all acknowledge that. I think any of us who have served on local authorities would acknowledge the point that the Deputy has made in relation to that also. The levying and collection of rates are matters for each individual local authority. The ARV, the annual rate of valuation, which is applied to the valuation of each property, determined by the Valuation Office to obtain the amount payable in rates, is decided by the elected members of each local authority in the annual budget, and its determination is a reserved function. The Government has no plans at this juncture to introduce a temporary levy on large out-of-town retail operations. In terms of planning policy, Minister Hogan and the Minister of State for Housing and Planning published new development contribution guidelines in January of last year, 2012. The new guidelines build on the experience gained in recent years and also align development contribution policy with the Government's prioritisation of employment creation, investment and sustainable development. I think that point is already being addressed by the Deputy in his initial contribution. Above all, the guidelines are intended to support proper planning and sustainable development while also prioritising job creation and economic investment. I think we all, are aware in this House, across the political spectrum, of the pressures on small and medium enterprises and intergenerational businesses in places like Naas and Finglas, to which the Deputy has referred. But in that context, local authorities have been asked by the Department of the Environment, Community and Local Government, by way of a circular letter, to exercise restraint or, where possible, reduce commercial rates and local charges for 2013. Local authorities have responded well to such requests in recent years, and in 2013, 87 out of the 88 rating authorities have either reduced their ARV or kept it the same as in 2012. The Deputy has referred to the Government's Action Programme for Effective Local Government, putting people first, and this has indicated that in the context of reorganisation of local governance structures, the proposed new municipal districts will provide an opportunity to achieve a more coherent approach to rates and charges on a county-wide basis, having regard to funding requirements and the need to support employment and business competitiveness. I don't know, to be honest, how that dynamic will work in the area of Finglas, and it's probably easier to map that potential in terms of counties like Cork, where you have clear, distinct municipal areas that don't border on a big metropolitan area, so there will be a challenge there, and I acknowledge the Deputy's point in that sense. The action programme proposes rates harmonisation to cater for differences between ARVs of towns and counties. Mr Hogan's approach to rates harmonisation will seek to ensure, on the one hand, that harmonisation does not lead to significant net loss of revenue in individual counties with consequential implications for services, and, on the other hand, that increases in rates do not impact negatively on businesses and employment. The Minister has informed me that he will continue to keep the approach to rates by local authorities under active review, and that he is determined that every avenue will be pursued to optimise efficiency and contain costs in the local government sector. Thank you.
Deputy, 1 or 2 minutes, Paul. Yeah,
Thank
2
you,
minutes.
thank you, Cathaoirleach, and thank you, Minister. In fairness, the response is actually reasonably positive. There is a possibility at light at the end of the tunnel that it will be looked at and reviewed. But just one anecdotal piece of evidence. In a village that has more vacant units than there are ones full, and in an economy that is beginning just to turn around, which is great, 2 local lads from Finglas have opened up a new 4-star pizza with a Subway in it too there just recently. They've only opened it up there just after Christmas, but they've had the building since before Christmas. Their rates was something like €9,000 for last year, even though they weren't even up and running. Now they're competing with a large supermarket that sells anything from a light bulb to a banana and everything in between it, and a computer actually, and anything else actually you want to buy at this stage. And they have plenty of parking spaces, which in fairness through development contributions they would have paid for in the first place. But the reality is you have these 2 local people who are trying to meet our challenges of creating jobs and being innovative, and have set up a business, and they're in an area of a village whereby it is falling at its knees, and that story is replicated throughout every single county. You drive from here to Cork, and if we didn't have to go on the motorway, we'd pass through some of these towns that both you and I know, where units are closing down because they just can't afford things like the rates and so on. Whereas we can go to some other places just out of the towns, these large retail units, where they're thriving because more people can go there, they don't have issues with parking and things like that and so on. So what I'm really just saying is that I welcome that the Minister for the Environment says that he will keep an eye on this, but if we are really serious about bringing life back in to our villages and towns, whether they're urban or rural, we have to look at the amount of rates we charge them, because the reality is those who can pay more should pay more, and those who can't pay as much shouldn't pay as much. And in the principle of fairness, that's the way to do things. And if we want to keep our villages alive, if we want to bring life into somewhere like Finglas, we have to look at the rates we charge. And surely somebody who operates a 4-star pizza in a village that's falling at its knees, as opposed to in a retail outlet outside which has multiple parking and has huge advantages, shouldn't have to pay the same rates. And that's just one anecdotal example. Minister, thanks very much for your response here today. It was reasonably positive, and there was some sort of light at the end of the tunnel. And Cathaoirleach, thank you very much.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I'm kind of getting a bit peckish now. 4-star pizza. I was thinking, it's a long way to Cork. I might pop in. No, but just, I mean, on a serious note, I absolutely concur with what the Deputy is saying. And we're seeing that effect right throughout the landscape. I think there are other factors other than the cost of rates which are, which are influencing that dynamic. And you're right about, the out-of-town multiples being able to house all products across a broad spectrum, and that's certainly having an effect for smaller towns and villages. I think smaller towns and villages, though, are going to have to be creative, because I think, consumption, has modified, considerably. Conspicuous consumption is virtually flatlined as we know it, and we're going to have to be maybe more creative about how we reimagine town centres and villages as well. But I do take the point that the Deputy is making. Thank you.
Cormagat, sin Gerard topic issues, and is Kish today.